Two men who lived in a seaside community decided to go sailing together one particular day as an alternative to accompanying their wives who had planned to spend the same day Christmas shopping at the local mall. Shortly after they set sail on what was to be a 3-hour voyage, the weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed, if not for the courage of the fearless crew. Sorry, just a reflex. But I digress. Anyway, storm did come up unexpectedly. The boat was thrown to and fro while the men fought vainly to keep her under control and afloat. Inevitably, the boat went down and the men were thrown into the sea. Finally, after clinging to some wreckage for what seemed like an eternity, they were cast ashore on an island. Unfortunately, the island turned out to be not deserted, but rather inhabited by a fierce tribe of cannibals. You have to go with me a little bit here. As the men lay exhausted on the beach, the hostile natives began firing at them with their blowguns. And as the men fled back into the surf, dodging poison darts and looking for any wreckage they could cling to, one looked at the other and said, "You know, today hasn't gone exactly as I'd hoped." And the other replied, "Yeah, but it sure beats the heck out of an afternoon Christmas shopping at the mall." It's a hectic time of year. 7 days to go. Along the way on the journey that we have been taking together during Advent, I've been sharing some of my perceptions and experiences of the season as we talked about one of the parables of Jesus. I have shared with you that the first feeling that I always associated with the season was anticipation. And that anticipation led to expectation, which led to preparation, to getting ready. And I did mention that for me as a boy growing up, the anticipation, the preparation was all geared toward reaching the ultimate goal of Christmas morning. That was, for at least this little boy, the culmination of all the hopes, all the dreams of the season. And for me and for most of my friends back then, that meant presents. One of my favorite seasonal movies is the one that gets shown for 24 straight hours on Christmas Day, The Christmas Story. One of the reasons it's one of my favorites is that it is, for me, to say the least, almost autobiographical. I don't know if you've seen the film, but I actually went to that elementary school. I had those same friends, even the same neighborhood bully. I had the same elementary school teacher. And you would see, if you could actually see my 5th grade school photo, that I was the same kid. I was Ralphie. And the movie is about Ralphie and his pursuit of the Red Ryder lever-action air rifle against a stream of adults, all saying to him, "You'll shoot your eye out." And as the film draws near to its conclusion, we see Ralphie and his brother Randy storming downstairs on Christmas morning. Following them, very much more slowly, of course, are his parents, sleep-filled eyes and all. And what follows is an orgy of tearing ribbons and paper from the pile of presents on the floor under the tree. Certainly one of my favorite scenes is the one where the two boys simultaneously rip paper from individual packages, obviously coming from a well-meaning relative, and wind up looking at matching pairs of socks. They look at the socks, they look at one another, and then again, simultaneously, they throw the socks over their shoulders and dive back into the pile for something more attractive. There's no doubt that presents are fun. And there is certainly no doubt that the Christmas shopping season has been, and probably still remains, the single biggest event in the economic life of the retail industry. And advertising agencies, internet sites these days, postal and shipping services all get a bite at the apple known as the Christmas present. And that's because exchanging gifts is, for many people, the cornerstone of the Christmas season. Now, I have to admit that I do have a bit of a problem with the whole concept of exchanging gifts. It comes to me with an implied sense of obligation, an implied sense of competition. But at the same time, I also have to say that I do think that the giving of gifts to those that we hold most dear, those we truly care about, is a most appropriate way to celebrate the season. And that's because the fact is that amidst all the noise and confusion and economic benefit of the season is the simple truth that God has given to us in a manger in Bethlehem the very best present of all, the present of his presence. I'd spell the words out for all of you, but you know what I'm talking about. The simple truth is that our present from God on that first Christmas is his presence. Come into the world in the same way that we all come into the world, as a baby born of a young woman. Babies change things in a big way. That's one thing every parent comes to understand. And so it should be no surprise that it is the arrival of a baby in that little town of Bethlehem which changed everything for everyone. The God who knows and loves and cares for all of his children. The one being, Santa notwithstanding, who really does know when we're sleeping and who knows when we're awake. The one who really does know when we've been bad or good. That very God had become one of us. One of my favorite traditions during the season, I think I already told you, is setting up the manger scene at our house. It's still one of my favorites. It was a nativity scene given to me by my grandfather. He started giving it to me one piece at a time the year I was born. But for 3 years, when I was 14, 15, and 16 years old, my home church, just like you folks here, had a living nativity scene in front of the church. We did it during the 2 weeks leading up to Christmas. We would get together right after Thanksgiving and build a fairly substantial structure surrounded by a fence. And the reason we had the fence was that one of the church members still had a small farm, and every year would bring a few sheep and a donkey, which would be placed within the enclosure and got to spend their Advent season on Cottage Street outside the church. I find myself wondering if in the downtown neighborhood where the church is located, we could still do that today. Probably at the very least there would be a city ordinance against it. But back then, every evening during those 2 weeks before Christmas, from 7 to 10 p.m., we had a full-fledged nativity scene made up of real live people: Mary, Joseph, one angel, 4 shepherds, three wise men. They were all there. For some reason unknown to me, then or now, I was always a wise man. Obviously not typecasting. We'd have 2 different groups of people signed up to take part for each night, and we'd rotate 45 minutes or so at a time because of the cold weather. We'd come together about a half an hour before we were scheduled to go on and get into costume. I could still feel the liquid latex that would get spread on my chin in order to accommodate the beard that every good wise man had to have. The funny part about the beard is I can still remember the feel of the ice crystals that would form on the whiskers as my breath condensed while standing outside. When we were ready, someone would lead in prayer and we would walk out in silence, enter the enclosure, and take up our positions. We were supposed to stand as still as possible in reverent silence as people came by to see. Standing still and in silence for 45 minutes was hard, if not impossible, for a teenager. But then we'd come back in for hot chocolate while our positions were occupied by the second shift, and then we'd go back out again. I asked once about the length of the 45-minute shift and was told by somebody, I'm not sure whether they were kidding or not, They were 45 minutes was set as the time because no one knew a teenager who could keep quiet for 46 minutes. As you might expect, there were a lot of humorous experiences along the way, the surprise shouts from the children who came to watch when they first realized we were real people, sheep attempting to make a meal out of the laces of my sneakers or boots, beards falling off when the adhesive loosened, one of the shepherds actually dozing off while leaning on his staff and falling into the manger. The baby doll survived intact, but I have to say that the irony of having a pretend baby Jesus in a scene which represented God becoming a real human being was not lost even on a teenager like me. But besides the whiskers and the hot chocolate and the aggressive sheep, besides even the classmates from school who would come by and try to figure out which one was me so they could make me laugh, besides all that, what struck me then and what lives in my memory until today is a sense of wonder. It's still a little hard to describe, he said as he was about to try anyway. But I guess it felt to me like I was experiencing, in some small sense, what it must have been like for those shepherds on the hillsides outside of Bethlehem on that night. Most often the reality back then was that sheepfolds were cave-like overhangs on the side of the hill. A rough stone wall would be erected across the front of the natural enclosure, and there would be an opening left in that wall through which the sheep would pass in and out and find pasture. And at night, when the sheep were safely in the fold, a shepherd would lay down across the opening. He would literally, as Jesus says, become the gate, the doorway of the sheep. And all of a sudden, on that one special night, the darkness was demolished by this heavenly light. And the angel tells them that a baby has been born in Bethlehem. And a choir of angels burst forth in a hymn of praise, leaving the sheep behind and going off to that little town to find this baby involved a significant risk to the shepherd's livelihood, but they went anyway. They went to see a baby in a stable. And as it happened to me, standing in the front yard of our church on Cottage Street in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, something in that experience touched their hearts and changed them forever. They told Mary and Joseph about their experience and about what they were feeling. For that matter, they told everyone and anyone who would listen about their experience and about what they were feeling. And they returned to the sheep, glorifying and praising God for all that they had heard and seen. They had come, literally, into the presence of God and been changed. That's a little bit like what Charles Dickens was really getting at, you know. He talks in the story we read or see or hear every Christmas season in a seemingly infinite number of different configurations about a cranky old miser and the ghosts of Christmas past and present and future. But what he was really writing about is the way that being confronted with love and grace, with God's best Christmas present, can change lives. There was, of course, never a more grasping, grating, covetous old sinner than Ebenezer Scrooge. I have a sermon idea out there in the ether somewhere that is entitled simply A Tale of Two Scrooges. And it has to do with, what else, two different Christmas movies. The first is a made-for-TV film starring George C. Scott, titled quite simply, A Christmas Carol. It is a by-the-book version, an almost line-by-line recreation of Dickens' story. The second is a film made for the short-lived experiment in widescreen film entertainment called Cinerama. We talked about IMAX a couple of weeks ago. This was one evolution before IMAX. It's a musical starring Albert Finney, titled simply Scrooge. And it also follows the general pattern of Dickens' story. In each of these two films, Scrooge deals with three spirits: past, present, future, and is transformed. But after the transformation, the two films diverge. Now, I have to preface what I'm saying by sharing with you that I love the musical. It's tacky, it's cheesy, but I love it mostly because the music itself has become a part of my Christmas experience every year. From early in the season, I find myself humming "I Hate People," or my mom's particular favorite, "Thank You Very Much." But on Christmas Day, Albert Finney's Scrooge reacts to his transformation much differently than George C. Scott in his more traditional version. Finney's Scrooge indulges in a positive Armageddon of generosity. He buys toys and games for just about every child in London. He cancels the debts of anyone and everyone who owes him money. The whole city winds up singing and dancing with joy. And I think that in that orgy of generosity, that particular film misses the point that Dickens was trying to make. The point that Jesus was trying to make, even in his parable. I think Scott makes the point better. His Scrooge is motivated to take up some of his responsibility to those less fortunate. He decides to treat his clerk as a human being, not as a cog in a machine or a thing, and thereby makes his lot in life easier. He seeks to rebuild his relationship with his abandoned and estranged family. His life changes, and it changes for the better. And the changes in his individual life do have an impact on all those around him. We don't see the entire city of London bursting into song, but what we do see is the difference that the love which came into the world in the manger of Bethlehem can make in one single life. And we can also see how that difference, that changed life, can be a blessing to others. You see, that's one of the presents that the presence of the babe in the manger brings to us. The presence of love. In that event, God's infinite and absolute and unconditional love is shared with each and every one of us. And it is a love that, once received, can be shared with those around us. Just living day to day in this world can sometimes seem to sap our strength and test our endurance. But the love of God, which we welcomed into the world in a manger in Bethlehem, never changes. And it is that knowledge that can sustain us. We usually read the opening verses of Isaiah chapter 40 at this season of the year. "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and tell her that her trials have ended." But I like the way he concludes that same 40th chapter as well. "Do you not know, have you not heard? The Lord our God is everlasting. He is the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not faint or grow weary, and no one can approach his understanding. He gives strength to the weary. He increases power to the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary. Young men will stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will have their strength renewed. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint." They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. What a precious present for each of us in these days. As the old hymn says, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow, blessings all mine with 10,000 besides. He knows our needs even before we ask. And in every moment of need, in every moment of triumph, in every moment of joy, in every moment of sorrow, He is there. And He walks with me, and He talks with me, and He tells me I am His own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. That's because God's relationship with me, in fact, God's relationship with each and every one of us, is unique and individual and personal. And that relationship with us begins with a baby lying in a manger in Bethlehem. We'll be opening presents this week, but there are some presents we never have to open. They are ours now and for always. Saturday night, we will gather. We will meet Him at the manger once again. We will greet Him once again, just like the shepherds and the sages, just like a young boy wearing a false beard and standing in the cold, in a sense of awe and wonder and reverence on a December night. And we will share with one another the light of His love, the light of His presence. But whether you can be here Saturday night or not, I pray that this season you may know His love. You may know His strength. You may know His presence. Merry Christmas. Let's pray. Oh God, for this day, for this season, for the gift of your Son, we give you thanks. And allow us always to glory in that gift and to share it with one another. Amen.